anyone who's a regular Breitbart reader or listener knows that we can't expect the left and their establishment media allies to acknowledge these types of problems, with our immigration and border security, really national security policies. But in this next story, you'd think that the left would be willing to grant a little bit more coverage just for the clicks, just because of the sheer level of craziness. I'm talking about that New Mexico compound story. We've got Muslim extremists, 2 men, 3 women arrested after police found them starving children, allegedly training some of them to commit all sorts of crime, mass school shootings and whatnot. Dr. Siraj Jasser, he's the president of the American Islamic Reform for Democracy, and he joins us now. Dr. Jasser, this all started with a missing child report, and that child's remains were found in a tunnel under the compound, a tunnel that we've now found out has been mysteriously destroyed by authorities. There seems to be a lot more questions than answers, and really no one's talking about it. What do you think's going on?
Well, I think the levels of bizarreness in this story are just exponentially growing every day. And I think at the root of it, Amanda, is the bottom line is the grandfather who ultimately, we'll give him some credit, helped authorities find his son who was the ringleader, Siraj Wahaj Sr. So he was involved in narrowing them down, but he's like the gateway drug to the radicalization of his children. And ultimately, this was mostly his family. His grandchildren had disappeared. One was found dead. His remains were there, the 3-year-old Abdul Ghani. And the reason media is not covering this, I think, is this is a defining moment for American Muslims. Why? The grandfather, Siraj Wahaj Sr., is on the board of directors of most of the major Muslim organizations, including the Islamic Society of North America, the Council on American Islamic Relations. He's done hundreds of fundraisers for them. He's tied to Linda Sarsour. He's tied to so many known characters in the Muslim community. He did the first opening prayer to Congress. So what they're trying to do is not educate Americans about the connection that while he may have been against this type of radicalism, even the judge herself said she wasn't convinced by their radicalism, never used the word Muslim or jihad, and basically released them on a signature bond just a few days ago, again, because the left is in such denial. And she was actually a Republican governor appointee, so it's sort of bizarre. Yet Governor Martinez did say that she condemned the decision of this judge. But all I can tell you is that because of the connections to the major leadership of Muslim organizations in the country, the media is trying to downplay this as much as they can.
I was reading what the judge, what was behind her decision and whatnot, and saying, she just said, well, these are just, bad indicators, but there really was no evidence, as you said. But I mean, some of these rituals that they had cited, the boy foaming at the mouth, he was killed. They were trying to expel demons, and then trying to say that the body, he was going to, come back 4 months later and return as Jesus and tell them which government institutions to get rid of. And that's what they were training for. I mean, imagine any other situation where in America we have children being trained with weapons, a cache of weapons to take out government institutions or shoot up schools. I just don't. I mean, you mentioned it's because of the connections of the grandfather, but do you think that this is happening more often than we know of in America? This type of extreme Muslim. I don't even know if you want to call it that. This just sounds crazy.
Well, I would ask your listeners to sort of take a deep breath, and it might sound crazy, but this narrative is more than simply a cult. It is the ISIS narrative of what happens at the end of times. It is one of the major Islamic teachings that we're trying to reform against, is that at the end of times, that they were doing this ritual that that baby who had some type of birth problem was intentionally born that way. And they sacrificed him because they want him to come back as Jesus and then announce to mankind. This is a known narrative. If you look at the Dabiq magazine of ISIS, you look at the Islamic Jihad groups all over the world, this eschatology of their end-of-time scenario is a common recurring factor. So, unfortunately, Americans aren't learning about connecting the dots between these things. We continue to reinvent the wheel, and we keep thinking each one is a lone wolf, but they're all not only known wolves, these people were on the radar of the FBI, but they have a common teaching in their background. And American Muslims need to get off their, and begin to recognize that we have a problem And the gateway drug to their radicalization are a lot of these teachings that we need to get into the 21st century.
Yeah, really crazy stuff. And of course, their lawyer noted, and I'm reading from a CNN article, so this is not even, a Breitbart spin. The CNN article is saying that the defendants, the lawyer, saying that because the defendants were black Muslims, that was a problem, and that no one would, quote, bat an eye if the suspects were white Christians accused of shooting guns on their property or practicing their religion. I mean, this whole using of the Muslim race and race, religion and race to sort of like say that this was, not something that really was that big of a deal, just really kind of is jaw dropping.
It's bigotry. It is complete bigotry to say that because this individual was African American, that must be why we'll ignore what he did, or because he was a Muslim, we're going to ignore it. And actually, then we have different standards for approaching Muslim radicals than we would anyone else. And at the end of the day, I talked about in my book that I wrote in 2012 how Siraj Wahaj Sr., the only Islamic meeting I went to, he holds up the Quran and says it is our duty to change the U.S. Constitution with this document because the Constitution is man-made while this is God-made. And I protested the meeting, left in upset, being a naval officer, saying this is a seditious organization. And then we wonder why his children become separatists. And, this is the bizarre thing, is that I've been writing about it. In 2014, I was on Fox saying Siraj Wahaj Sr. should not be giving a prayer to the Democratic Party DNC. They dismissed him 2 days beforehand, said he shouldn't give the opening prayer to the DNC convention. And yet, in 2016, and then at the end of the day, no coverage of the radical ideology coming from it. I mean, we need to have a national conversation. And anything short of that is really bigotry against Muslims.
Well, how do you think that these people got this cache of weapons? I mean, I was reading some of the reports, and it's saying, the way that the police one of the ways that the police kind of found out about this is because someone in the compound had connected, or contacted, a friendly outside saying that they needed money for fears of starvation. I mean, how do you have money to buy weapons but not enough money to feed yourself?
That's brilliant. What saddens me is that nobody has made that connection. I've been talking about it as much as I can, and they say, well, the kids were starving. It's all about child abuse. And we're like, well, if it wasn't about committing acts of terror, how do they have money for targets and bullets and guns and tunnels and all this other stuff, and yet they can't feed their kids who are being tortured and imprisoned and trained on how to run through tunnels? So right. You're right. Nobody's covering the details of what the FBI knew. The prosecutors were actually admonished by the judge in a crazy way that didn't make any sense. And I hope more people continue to talk about this, because the layers of this onion need to be peeled for us to not allow this to happen again.
Again, folks, I'm talking to Zuhdi Jasser, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. He's the author of A Battle for the Soul of Islam. He's also the president of American Islamic Forum for Democracy. Dr. Jasser, one of these individuals that was arrested is a longtime illegal immigrant from Haiti. She overstayed her visitor visa. And in the first hour of the show, we were talking about some of the different ways that people that have ill will towards America are slipping into our country. Do you know anything about jihadis making inroads in the Caribbean? I mean, is that a new route that we need to start paying attention to?
Well, I think, at the end of the day, anyone coming to our country should be vetted for jihadism, for Islamism, political ideologies that are separatist and anti-American. I think, this immigrant was radicalized by Siraj Wahaj Jr., who was born here. His grandfather was born here, came through the Nation of Islam, a major anti-Semitic radical movement run by Louis Farrakhan. And Siraj Wahaj Sr. then converted to so-called mainstream Sunni Islam. So, this immigrant from Haiti, I believe, was probably radicalized or may have already been radicalized. You see pictures of them, and so obviously they're fundamentalists in their practice. So people think that Central America, South America doesn't have any connection to radical Islam. I'll remind you, Politico actually reported about a major element of Hezbollah that was running drugs and was working with cartels to fund major terror operations in the Middle East against Israel and elsewhere. So the bottom line is Obama stopped that work that had been over a 10-year investigation And yes, the Caribbean is one of the ports of entry for many of the jihadis.
Very, very scary stuff. Thank you so much, sir, for joining me. Good to get your thoughts on this very, very scary and mysterious case. I will definitely be covering it very closely. So thanks.
Anytime. Thanks for having me, Amanda.
Again, that was Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. He is the president of American Islamic Forum for Democracy. You can follow him on Twitter at Dr. Zuhdi Jasser.